Thank you so much. Thank you, Cheryl, and it's wonderful to be here. This is another world. First of all, we rely so heavily on you. I cannot tell you how many times a day we are Googling this, that, or the other. But I think we all share a common challenge, which is to figure out what is fact, what is not, what are the appropriate filters, how are we going to adjust. And as we at NBC spread to new platforms, and we have a huge push on digital platforms right now, we have to figure this thing out as we go along as well. And we make errors just in trying to sort through what the thresholds are. So I think we, in different ways, have some of the same challenges right now. I was just having lunch with a couple of people, some of your colleagues, and someone asked me, when did we first start doing live shots, which somehow evolved into a conversation about how do we used to file our stories. When I first went to the White House in 1981, I had covered Jimmy Carter's White House as sort of a junior backup correspondent when I first came to NBC. But I was assigned full-time in 1981, partly by accident, and that's one of the subtexts of the book, because I had screwed up badly. Not getting a fact wrong, but in really messing up on the Today Show one morning. I was assigned to go down to a place called Haynes Point and watch John Hinckley being transferred from a helicopter to a motorcade to go to federal court for his arraignment. And no one had seen this, suspected assassin, attempted assassin of President Reagan. And I was told, go down there. The Today Show wants a picture of this. It'll be about 8:30 in the morning, East Coast time. And, we just need to have a correspondent there protectively in case something happens. Well, Haynes Point was, hundreds and hundreds of yards away from where this was taking place. And the deal was that the camera with a telephoto lens used for space shots, frankly, first developed for space shots and then eventually perfected to get those fuzzy pictures of Ronald Reagan on horseback at the ranch, which was across a valley from where we were positioned on his long vacations in Santa Barbara. But so one of these cameras was going to be capturing this alleged picture of someone purported to be John Hinckley, and I was told, well, just stand next to the cameraman, but hook yourself up. And of course, not prepared in any fashion, 1981, Tom Brokaw, then anchoring the Today Show, comes to me and says, Andrea, what do you see? And instead of making it up, I completely flubbed it. The cameraman could see through his lens something. I could see nothing with the naked eye. And it was, according to the then president of NBC News, the worst single performance by a correspondent. There's got to be a category for that. Worst live shot by a correspondent in the field. Nowadays, with cable, and every other crazy way that we're trying to broadcast and send broadcasts up on cell phones and everything else that we do, going live is automatic. But in those days, it really wasn't. And so I got busted badly, and I didn't know it, because that's another feature of our business. I don't know about yours, but you don't know when you've had it. So the next Monday morning, I came in for work, and my name wasn't on the assignment sheet, which is a big hint. And I went into the business office, and I said, my name isn't on the assignment sheet. And the business manager said, didn't you know you've been banned from television? You've been reassigned to radio. I guess they thought I could do less damage. And so I had been, frankly, a fairly successful, very visible NBC correspondent up until then. Before Reagan was shot, I was full-time the energy correspondent, a position I had talked myself into because nobody else was covering it. And we then had the gas lines and the crisis and 78, 79, and then 3 Mile Island. So all of a sudden, with 3 Mile Island, I was covering a possible nuclear meltdown. And it was, so I had really been on the air a lot, more than the White House correspondent. So all of a sudden, and having done this little field job, I was totally messed up. And They offered me a job doing radio during the week at the White House, covering Reagan, as the backup number 4 correspondent, and then working the weekends on TV. And sort of the nice part of the story is that my senior television colleagues were a wonderful man named John Palmer and Judy Woodruff, then went to, Jim Lair's NewsHour, and then went to CNN, and is now back doing documentaries with the Pew Foundation at the NewsHour Productions, and is going to be doing some very interesting things in coming months. So Judy and John devised every excuse to get me back on television. In this highly competitive world, they were, looking for any reason to say, that's a story Andrea can do. Why don't we let Andrea have a shot at this? And I found that if I worked 7 days a week and made myself indispensable to the weekend nightly news, that I could eventually get back on the Today Show, and outlasted that former president of NBC News by many decades. So there are a number of lessons in all of that. It was launching me into the White House beat full-time, covering Ronald Reagan. Fascinating. I don't mean to sound nostalgic for the Cold War, but the stakes were huge. We used to ask Reagan, why aren't you meeting with your Soviet counterparts, this fierce anti-communist Ronald Reagan? And he would say, there was Brezhnev, and then there was Andropov and Chernyenko, and finally Gorbachev. And he would say, well, they keep dying on me. And finally, he had an interlocutor who was a youngish, intellectual, active, very ideological leader of the Soviet Union. And those summits, starting in Geneva in 1985 and going through Reykjavik and all, just fascinating period. And I learned a tremendous amount about, not just about politics, but about, partly about how much we don't know as White House correspondents, because we in this post-Watergate age thought we had inherited the mantle of Woodward and Bernstein, and there were so many leaks coming out of the Reagan White House in sharp contrast to this White House. People have compared George W. Bush to Ronald Reagan in terms of being a very good retail politician who has sort of a personality and a persona, an optimistic personality in the face of a lot of negative stuff. But the one of the enormous differences is that there were constant leaks coming out of the Reagan White House, because you had different parts of the Republican Party, the moderates and the conservatives, the Ed Meeses and Jim Bakers and Mike Devers, all merged together into this one White House, and everybody leaking about things, and it was just terrific for correspondence. But this, in contrast to now, where everyone is a Texan who came up loyally through, the Bush years, ascended with this president through the governor's office, and now would barely tell you if your pants were on fire, no less leak information that was in any way inimical to the interests of this president. So it's been a very contentious time and a difficult time for reporters. We can talk more about that and some of the threats and subpoenas, to say nothing of the jailing of reporters, in contrast to every standard that the Justice Department has ever held about not subpoenaing reporters unless absolutely necessary in almost a life-and-death situation. That said, we did not know about Iran-Contra. So we found out about it when Ed Meese, the Attorney General, walked into the press room and said, I have to tell you, something. We're about to announce that there's been this slightly illegal operation in the basement of the National Security Council. And so it's such a shock to the system to think that you're covering something 24/7 and had no idea that all this was going on, which brings us to today. And a lot of questions that I've asked, some I ask in the book, in having gone back to the transcripts from 2002 and 2003 from my coverage of the United Nations presentations of Colin Powell, and asking, why didn't the media know about the weapons of mass destruction